Well, it has been over a month since the conflict in Ukraine began, and it's an incredible story of tragedy made all the more poignant for Reach Global because we have many years of work within Ukraine with Ukrainian partners who are impacted. And of course, we've seen many stories across the news of the tragedy that's occurring there and what's happening with the refugees as they're trying to come across borders. Well, today I have with me people who are involved in the EFCA's response to the Ukrainian crisis. First of all, I want to introduce Katie Duggan, who is the liaison for Europe of Reach Global and the EFCA churches. Todd Hildebrand, who leads the Europe division for Reach Global, and Mark Lewis, who leads crisis response. Well, thank you for being with me today. I have just a few questions for you that we want to update you with what is happening in the EFCA's response in Europe with the Ukrainian situation. So the first question, could you just share a bit about how has the EFCA responded to the crisis in Europe from the Ukrainian refugees?
Yeah, as soon as we got word of the invasion, we just initially communicated with Todd and some other city team leaders, and then quickly got on the ground to start the process of relating, listening, learning to understand the nature of the crisis. I was with Cassidy Baker, our city team leader from Budapest, on the border with Ukraine. We were in Poland and in Slovakia with local church partners there, but also in contact with our local church connections from the decades of service within Ukraine, with Ukrainian pastors and leaders across the country, trying to understand their circumstances and just engage immediately in response and aid.
Yeah, and well, like Mark was saying, he was in with the city team leader from Budapest. And I just got back from seeing firsthand what our teams in Budapest and Berlin are doing, and amazing things like showing up at train stations, volunteering. And I think one of the most helpful things, though, that I saw in Budapest, the team was going through a training called Trauma Care Conversations. And they went through that training, and then we're also helping to train our partners in the city there as well, those who are in a position to help and come alongside refugees. But in Berlin, and it's been really neat to see how the city mission in Berlin, that is a Christian wing of the government, they have been asked to actually oversee the entire process of welcoming and landing and helping refugees either passing through or moving into the city. And that is a group that we have worked with over the years and who has invested in the city. And the government is recognizing their investment and that Christians are showing up and want to help and are equipped to help in a time like this.
Yeah, our teams across Europe have been responding in different ways, depending on their context. I'd share a little bit about the team in Bucharest. There were a group of churches that their pastors were friends, but they'd never actually done anything together. And this was the occasion for them to actually come together to provide a unified front in order to respond to this overwhelming crisis that they're seeing. So they're able to provide food and shelter. They're able to provide legal aid, transportation, translation, coming alongside even taking care of kids, medical assistance, counseling, pastoral care, supplies for them as well. So this has been something that has bonded these churches together across the city in order to stand together to respond to this crisis as people are coming into their city. They're going up to the borders. They're doing everything that they can together as the body of Christ in order to minister to these people that are on their doorsteps.
Mm-hmm.
That's an incredible testimony of how Christ can galvanize the church together. And I'm sure each of you have heard or experienced some only God stories.
Yeah, well, last week I was in Krakow and got into a conversation with a Ukrainian college student, had been living there for 4 or 5 years. In the typical European fashion, he spoke 4 to 5 languages and was learning working on his next. And he just shared with us how when things became really clear that it was likely that his country would be invaded, that he really felt like he needed to figure out how to be grounded and what would really ground him through all of this, and is really trying to figure that out. And as I talked with him along with my colleague Amy, and he was open to exploring the Christian faith and even reading the Bible, and he had never done that before and wanted to for the first time. And I think what we're seeing, he's just an example of kind of what we're seeing. Like, war creates questions in all of us, and we are looking for things that ground us. And I think we're seeing that in other places in Europe as well, whether it was a taxi driver, whether it was a server at a restaurant, or whether it was somebody I've known for many, many years. The reality of war on your own continent is real. And that makes you think about what you're about and what life is about. And so I think that, as horrible as this is, I think God is using some of it for good, in terms of really people who were maybe previously not open to Christianity or a personal relationship with God might now be.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many stories, and I think there are stories of Ukrainians that are, yeah, like Katie described, they're coming to terms with the world around them. But I think there's also, I've heard stories of Romanians and Hungarians and Poles who they're seeing that there's a need, and they're realizing that for them to step up means to give up something of themselves and to rely on the Lord for this, to sacrificially give from maybe what they don't really have a lot of, and count on God to take care of their needs while they're extending themselves to the people around them, people that are on their doorstep that have nothing at all. So that's been amazing to hear some of these stories, and to see people who at this moment realize what's really important in their lives and step out and live that out in this, as Katie mentioned, this horrible context.
Yeah. Mark, you have spent some time in various countries there since this crisis began, and I'm sure you have a number of stories, but what's one that really stands out for you?
What has really impressed me is the response of local church pastors in cities across Europe, but especially in Ukraine. One local church leader that we have had relationship with through ReachGlobal for decades, really. I just followed his particular story, seeing him on day 2 or 3 living in a subway station with his family, and kind of waiting out what was this going to look like, and then kind of transitioning him and his family into living in the basement of their church, and then welcoming in members from the church and those in the community that were surrounding the building, into the basement for meals. And then as fighting started to get closer and more bombs were dropping, people were just living in the basement together. Somewhere between 125, 150 people at a time were in the basement. We were able to get resources on a regular basis into the hands of this local church pastor to facilitate food and fuel. He was able to use those funds to help families get vehicles or arrange rides to evacuate. And just the sacrifice of this leader and his family, their courage to step forward into really a dangerous situation, but really to represent the kingdom in such a beautiful way, caring for the body, but extending the gospel ministry, extending the security of the local church and the provision of the local church to just people in the community who came to the church in their moment of crisis, in the moment of need. And just seeing that story of local church pastors living out the gospel in very self-sacrificial ways in Ukraine, Poland, Hungary, and beyond across Europe it's just been really inspiring to me.
That is inspiring. And it's exciting to hear how some of the resources that out of generosity, many US churches and individuals have been contributing, those funds are being put to use right now. Now, obviously, this is a dynamic situation. We don't know what the future holds in the conflict, what's going to happen with refugees. What does it look like when there's a return? If there's a return, what does rebuilding look like? There's so many unknowns. But to the extent that we do know or we can anticipate, what do you see happening moving forward in this response?
Well, like you said, it's a really dynamic situation developing. We don't know what's going to happen. So if you or your church are interested in getting involved, though, please reach out to us. We'd love to hear about what you're interested in doing and just get to know you, because there will be ways to get involved. We're just not sure exactly how at this point. But specifically, there are two actual things that we would love help with. One is if you know of anyone in your church speaks Ukrainian or Russian, and to help translate just would be a great resource for us. So Ukrainian and Russian speakers are people that we're looking for currently. And then also this summer, we have an opportunity for college students or young adults aged 18 to 25 to serve in Budapest or Berlin on a summer team called Apex. And we'd really love to have more young adults involved this summer. And we know that there are going to be so many opportunities for young adults to step into alongside of our teams and be part of what we've just talked about here.
That's exciting. Todd, what do you see happening moving forward?
Yeah, I want to relate a story. When Mark and I were in Zamość, Poland, we visited a church, Polish church. It was maybe 3 o'clock in the afternoon. As we walked in, they were still singing. And we asked, is the service still going on? And they said, no, these are the Ukrainian believers that are staying here with us as they're transiting through. And they just continued after lunch, they came back down and just continued in worship. And as we're looking at this diaspora of Ukrainian believers moving across Europe, each one of our teams are looking at how we can reach out to them, not only to minister to them, but to platform them as they are they're providing this is a unique situation for them. And we want them to bloom where the Lord has them. We want them to blossom and to flourish. We don't know what that's going to look like, but we are trying to keep our eyes open to that. So each one of our teams, whether they're in England or France or Portugal, Germany, Austria, Hungary, Romania, we're excited about what the Lord is doing among the Ukrainian diaspora, and we're hoping to see that flourish and grow.
Mark, what do you see happening moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, as we've looked at this, you said it, it's still a crisis that's unfolding. I mean, we don't really know what the dimensions of this are going to look like, but we're seeing the context of Ukraine itself being significantly disrupted, and in that context, the opportunity to participate in the restoration and revitalization of the church, while at the same time the possibility of extending gospel ministries to people that don't know the Lord in those places. Kind of building out from there, we see in border countries, places where refugees are heading, significant opportunity for ministry by the refugees, by the local churches, among the refugees. But as well, we're seeing an opportunity for the local churches to engage interested people, people that maybe never would have thought about connecting with the church, engaging them and inviting them to come and participate in responding to the refugees, but at the same time, discovering the church and meeting Jesus in the process. So that's really exciting to see how the Lord would use that. But then we've got the strategic aspect of who we are as ReachGlobal, a long history of city teams across the continent that provide and partner relationships in those places that provides a strong backbone for moving forward in developing ministry strategy. And at the same time, we know that God moves in the midst of crisis and God opens new doors. And so we're excited to see what new partnerships, what new relationships might open, what new possibilities there would be to even start new city teams in places of interest, or to see what the Lord would have us do to reinvest with people and resources for the long term of just seeing gospel ministry be vibrantly spread across the Europe continent. So we see lots of possibilities, lots of exciting things ahead. But we know in the midst of all of that, there's extreme devastation, extreme brokenness. And so the other piece that I would say we see is just this need to relate and care for people individually, helping them process their trauma experiences, and really ministering the gospel in very practical and personal ways amongst many, many hurting people.
We are so grateful for the generosity of the EFCA churches and individuals who have given towards the EFCA's efforts in response to this. And we want to encourage you to follow your donations with prayer. We love to pray for what we're investing in, and it is through prayer that so much gets done for the kingdom. So pray for, obviously, peace in Ukraine, that God will just intervene in that conflict. Pray for the churches and God's followers who remain in Ukraine, people who have sacrificed and are sacrificing in order to live out the gospel. And pray also for those refugees, 4 million of whom have left Ukraine, and yet still 10 million or more who are still within Ukraine but are displaced. They need the support. And so we are just so grateful that you're joining us in prayer. If you'd like to give, we will include a link here. We would love to receive your donations. You've heard a little bit about how that is being used, and it will continue to be used in the future for the growth of the church and for the spread of the gospel and for the encouragement of your brothers and sisters in Europe. So thank you. We appreciate you, and we look forward to sharing more with you in the future.